Hello, folks. Welcome to Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan, your host, Arvind Swaminathan. Well, I'm sorry it's been a while. I've had a few problems, as you can see. I'm a little pulled down, but not to worry. What we take up today, the very thing that's on everybody's minds, lips, hearts, you name it, because the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban has taken the world by storm. Therefore, today we will be discussing the Talibanization of Afghanistan. Now, this, by the way, don't take it as anti American or pro Russian or pro Chinese or anything like this. It's just pure statement of what has happened, what is happening, and later on, what might happen, what would be the total fallout of this takeover. Because even today, Talibanization of Afghanistan isn't a done thing because there are squabbles going on inside, which most of us don't seem to know about, but it's beginning to surface now. For instance, the attacks on US troops and forces just during the middle of the evacuation means, quite honestly, that there is a fight on between the Taliban and ISIS-K, which is the ISIS Khorasan group. Now, how far this is true or not, again, is just conjecture. Now, let's go back to how it all started. What is the genesis of the Taliban? It didn't happen overnight. It started off, believe it or not, in 1979, when President Carter was in charge in the US. He set aside $500 million to set up a Mujahideen sort of operation in Afghanistan. How was this done? People were handpicked, selected for the job. The CIA funneled weaponry through to the Saudis, from there to ISI, again via the CIA. The ISI in Pakistan handed this over to the Taliban and pushed them all into Afghanistan. Now, the original Taliban were mainly Saudis, i.e., from Saudi Arabia. They were trained by the British Special Forces units, and they did a very good job of training them. When the Soviet Union did come in, they were ousted. They didn't get a chance because the missiles, the training imparted to these Mujahideen was really superb. The result is that once the Soviet Union left, the Taliban took over. And their brand of Islam again points to Saudi Arabia because theirs is the Wahhabi form of Islam, which means no entertainment, no song and dance, no television, no music, no sport, nothing. Just 5 times a day you pray, and that's it. Women, and here is the odd bit, women were nothing. They had no rights, nothing. Women belonged to everybody, which is White House and communism, not Islam. How did the two get mixed up here? There's something worth thinking about. What happened next? Throughout Ronald Reagan's time, George Bush Sr.'s time, the Clinton administrations, everything was as it was. In fact, they were actually negotiating with the Taliban for a pipeline to bring Caspian oil and gas to the Arabian Sea via Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, the original Taliban were mainly Saudis, i.e., from Saudi Arabia. They were trained by the British Special Forces units, and they did a very good job of training them. When the Soviet Union did come in, they were ousted. They didn't get a chance because the missiles, the training imparted to these Mujahideen was really superb. The result is that once the Soviet Union left, the Taliban took over. And their brand of Islam again points to Saudi Arabia because theirs is the Wahhabi form of Islam, which means no entertainment, no song and dance, no television, no music, no sport, nothing. Just 5 times a day you pray, and that's it. Women, and here is the odd bit, women were nothing. They had no rights, nothing. Women belonged to everybody, which is White House and communism, not Islam. How did the two get mixed up here? There's something worth thinking about. What happened next? Throughout Ronald Reagan's time, George Bush Sr.'s time, the Clinton administrations, everything was as it was. In fact, they were actually negotiating with the Taliban for a pipeline to bring Caspian oil and gas to the Arabian Sea via Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is because the alternative would be to take that oil and gas to the Mediterranean as an outlet, which most Mediterranean countries would just not permit, simply because of the pollution threat and dangers. Now we begin to see something about the American game plan. Originally, ISIS was supposed to be based in Afghanistan, but thanks to 9/11, this could not happen. George Bush Jr., he went into Afghanistan to root out so-called Al-Qaeda. Nobody knows, nobody even heard about Al-Qaeda until then. Nobody heard of Osama bin Laden until then. Now, Osama bin Laden's brother, real brother, was Bush Sr.'s business partner in Saudi in the 1980s, in their construction business. So how come this man is suddenly America's most wanted? Even the FBI never put him on their wanted list for 9/11. So how did they claim within half an hour of 9/11 that this is the man who's behind it? Anyway, they went into Afghanistan, ostensibly to remove all terrorism from there. But from what they did over 20 years, it seemed they never had any such intention, because the Taliban was their own people whom they had put there. And they've also always considered them to be their friends. Same with Pakistan. All their weaponry was going through Pakistan to these Taliban, which is what enabled them to maintain a presence for over 20 years. Without that weaponry, which is also coming from the US, how could they have done it? And are you telling me that with all their firepower, the American defense services or armed forces could not have wiped them out within 6 months at any time? That's a little far-fetched to even think of believing that they couldn't do it, unless they wanted to do it. The fact that they have survived for 20 years, the Taliban, without undue damage to their core and so on, either means that they have an unlimited source of recruits. Where are they from? Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan itself, or from Western Europe. And don't think I'm joking about this, because a lot of your ISIS were actually volunteers or mercenaries from Western Europe, which is again true, not just from Britain but from other parts as well, even a few Americans. This is the surprising bit, because once they found nothing happening in Afghanistan, ISIS, their next game plan was to make Syria the ISIS place, or the ISIS caliphate or stronghold. They destabilized the President Assad government through Saudi Arabia's backed al-Nusrat, and ISIS taking hold. The Soviet government or the Russian government intervened because it is a little too close to their underbelly. That put paid to ISIS in Syria. In fact, a very little known thing, it only appeared once in the press, way back about 2 or 3 years ago in India. 250 so-called ISIS fighters or terrorists, you can call them what you like, with their dependents and families, were rescued and escorted out of that ghetto in Syria, surrounded by Russian and Syrian troops. They were escorted out under guard from American and British forces. 1,000 to 1,200 trucks of these people with all their weaponry. Where did they go? Because we never heard any more about them. We wouldn't have heard any more about them because we wouldn't have heard about them at all, because there was no press coverage, no TV, no news, nothing. The only reason the news got out was somebody with their mobiles to make videos and smuggle that out. Otherwise, the world would never have known. Where did this ISIS group go? We never heard any more about them. Some reckon they went into Iraq, some into other parts of Syria. But no, they turn up here in Afghanistan. These were the people who were released from prisons in Afghanistan shortly before the Taliban take over. Now we're beginning to see, because this particular one is the one that has been firing rockets into the American evacuation effort. Now, further on from that, there's one bit of information that seems to have escaped everybody. The agreement between Biden's government and the Taliban was signed in February 2020. That's almost 18 months ago, not overnight. So the American government had 18 months, as did the NATO allies, not just to pull out, but to take all their friends, collaborators and everything with them. What were they doing for 17 and a half months? Twiddling their thumbs or what? Why is it that all of a sudden the Biden administration wakes up and starts on, helter-skelter, removing everybody from there? What went wrong? Why did they have to wait 17 and a half months? Why? What was the reason? You can't say this was unexpected. The other big point is this. Which army, when there is a planned and time-bound withdrawal, would leave all its weapons behind for the opposition to use against them? That doesn't make sense to me. Either that or it was planned. It was part of the agreement that they would leave all their weapons behind. So now you have a Taliban armed to the teeth. Plus they have something called an Air Force now, something they never had before. They've got over 100 Black Hawk fighter gunships, helicopter gunships. They've got 20 or 30 light combat aircraft, and God knows how many Hercules transport aircraft for fast transport and movement of troops. They've got God knows how many, 20,000 Humvees and APCs or armored personnel carriers. They've got 20 or 30,000 grenade launchers with grenades that fit into them. They've got hand grenades, about 15 or 20,000 of them. They've got 600,000 small arms, that means machine guns and light machine guns, assault rifles, pistols, handguns, you name it. All fully loaded with full backup of ammunition. Now, if you look at it closely, how is it that the American troops would have left all this behind unless they were ordered to do so? It's mind-boggling. Why would anybody do that? The only answer to that seems to be that Biden and the Taliban are in the same bed together. The other big point, which seems to have slipped under everybody's radar, where are these refugees going? To this day, Turkey has taken a few refugees. Now they say they can't take any more. There are 56, maybe 57 OIC countries, i.e. Organization of Islamic Countries. Not one has come forward to say, we will take in these refugees, we will look after you, please come. All of them, bar none, or bar a few, have gone into non-Islamic countries. Western Europe, places like Italy, Germany, France, Spain, Holland, UK, some to Canada, some to US. Then you've got Denmark and Sweden. But a large chunk of them, for some reason, always seem to come to India. Now we already have a problem, a very big one. Muslims, as you know, once they get to a certain proportion of the population, they start making demands. And they've started that in India. How? Let me explain this. At independence, out of a 350 million population, less than 6% were Muslims. Now, at 6%, it would have meant 21 million. Today, they claim there are 22%. They form 22% of India's population. That alone would mean about 308 million out of 1.4 billion. If it's 25%, you've got a lot more. Now, all news channels in India were agreed last year. There were 60 million illegal migrant Bangladeshis in India, all Muslim. But all of a sudden we find police raids and NIA raids all over India. You'll find a 5,000 colony of Rohingyas in Jammu and Kashmir, 1,200 on Delhi's border, another 1,500 on Noida, that's UP. You'll find more in Haryana, some more in Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Hyderabad, then Bangalore and Karnataka. Where did they come from? How is it that so many Rohingyas, a militant bunch who were thrown out of Burma or Myanmar, how did they end up in India? The answer is quite simple. All your network of mosques or masjids, your waqf boards, your madrasas, and all your other Muslim organizations and companies, they help in getting all these people resettled. Now, they're resettled at our expense. We pay taxes and they get everything free. How come? So do a lot of these so-called illegal migrants. Now, with such a huge Muslim influx, they insist on demands, and the demands are coming through now. Now, we can't afford all this, so why do they come here? Why don't they go to Muslim countries? Is this the Muslim or OIC game plan? To push them all into non-Muslim countries to spread Islam, their own brand of Islam, to Islamize the whole world. And don't worry, America won't escape this either. No will Canada. Yes, one or two countries like Australia and Canada have said, when they say don't serve pork, you say, look, you don't like it here, go to an OIC country where they accept you. This is not an Islamic country, and it's not going to be. You come here because you think it's a better life. Very good. You become a part of this life or go back. We are not going to bend over backwards to please you. You adjust to allow yourself to stay here. And I think it's about time people in the whole world began to understand this and tried to enforce this among these Islamic migrants. They have to understand they are not in an Islamic country. If they want to stay here, they have to make adjustments. Now see, if the Taliban or ISIS takes over and forms its caliphate in Afghanistan, what happens? Israel can then carve out its own greater Israel. A map they put out in 1948, which UN threw out. What was that? It included 2/3 of Syria, 2/3 of Iraq, or half of Iraq, 1/3 of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, all of the Sinai, all of Egypt up to the Nile, up to the Mediterranean, southern Turkey and Lebanon, coastal Turkey. This was greater Israel as they had planned. Now with Syria in disarray, Iraq in absolute, well, back to the Stone Age, do they have any competition? Similarly, Saudi Arabian influence, they can take over places like Yemen and one or two other, the Gulf states. Their influence gets established. They're already established in the Islamic world. Now we come to something really mind-boggling. Pakistan have been aligned with the Taliban and ISIS since the 70s. All of them are either in refugee camps or training camps, training each other and so on, and others also. Supposing they take over and get hold of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal, ever wonder what that might do? Has Mr. Biden ever considered that? possibility or eventuality? Well, it's about time he did, because the next foray for these people is not Russia or China, but India. Because A, it's a huge population, B, it's a fertile land, and they don't care if 200 million or 300 million get killed. It's still damn good territory. There is water there are rivers there are trees, unlike West Asia, which is almost a barren land in most places. Plus, with such a huge population of so-called converts, forced or otherwise, what more do they want? So please consider this. What if the Pakistani nuclear arsenal falls into their hands? Where do we go from there? Can you guarantee safety? Can you guarantee that India won't be attacked and so on? Anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching. Please consider what I have said, not as a hate this thing, but as things that could possibly and quite possibly will and can happen. And this is virtually a little wake-up call. Thank you for listening. If you like, please subscribe to my channel, Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. Share it with your friends and groups and ask them to share it on. Because this is a very serious topic and a very serious matter. The Islamization of the whole world is not a joke. It's beginning to unfold in no uncertain manner. Thank you, folks, and bye.